I had the little velvet box open in my palm, and Mr. Pruitt's pen was already uncapped, waiting for a signature, when I reached for Ivy's hand to slide the ring off her finger, and she yanked it back like I tried to take her lungs out instead. "Ivy," I said quietly, "it's over. We don't need it anymore." "I know what it is, Beckett." Her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard from her before, not once in 6 months of pretending, not during her mother's cross-examinations at Sunday dinner, not during the appraisal scare, not even the night Palmer showed up at the shop uninvited and stood too close to her for too long. "I know exactly what it is." She was still holding her hand against her chest like I'd threatened her, and Mr. Pruitt was watching both of us over the rim of his reading glasses with the polite, professional discomfort of a man who bills by the hour and would very much like this particular hour to end. Ivy's mother, Carol, had gone still by the window. Even the ceiling fan in that stuffy little law office seemed to slow down, like the whole room was leaning in to hear what she'd say next. "Take it off yourself," I said, gentler this time, "or I will." "Don't," she said. "Please don't. That's the part nobody tells you about pretending to be in love with someone. You think the hard part is the performance, the hand-holding, the practiced laughs, the careful choreography of two people convincing a room they belong together. Nobody warns you that the hard part is the ending. Nobody warns you that somewhere in the middle of faking it, you stop being able to tell where the act stopped and you started. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up 6 weeks, to the day I agreed to marry a woman I definitely, absolutely, was not in love with. At least, that's what I told myself walking into her flower shop that morning, and it took approximately 4 minutes for that particular lie to start falling apart. My name is Beckett Wren. I was 31 that spring, running a small restoration business out of a converted boathouse on the edge of Birch Lake, the kind of town where everybody's grandmother knew everybody else's grandmother, and the diner still took handwritten checks. I fixed old things, porches, docks, barn doors, the occasional stubborn antique dresser somebody's aunt insisted was worth saving. It was quiet work, honest work, work that let me keep my hands busy and my head mostly empty, which suited me fine because my head, left to its own devices, had an unfortunate habit of wandering 3 blocks over to a flower shop with a crooked green awning and thinking about a woman who had made it extremely clear, several years earlier, that she saw me as a friend and absolutely nothing more. Ivy and I had grown up practically in each other's pockets. Our mothers had been in the same book club before either of us could walk, which meant our entire childhoods ran on parallel tracks. Same school bus, same swim lessons at the lake dock, same disastrous middle school talent show where I'd try to play guitar and she'd try to sing over me, and we'd both, by mutual unspoken agreement, never brought it up again. She was the one who taught me how to identify poison ivy the hard way at age 11, after I'd spent 3 days covered in a rash while she doubled over laughing on her grandmother's porch steps, insisting my suffering was extremely funny given the circumstances. I was the one who taught her to drive stick in the church parking lot the summer we turned 16, both of us stalling the truck so many times that Pastor Whitfield eventually came out and asked, with admirable patience, if we could possibly relocate our lesson somewhere with fewer stained glass windows nearby. There had been one summer, the year we turned 26, when I almost said something. We'd been sitting on the end of the town dock after a bonfire, everyone else long gone home, just the two of us and a cooler of warm soda, and Ivy had looked over at me in that particular blue hour of night and said, quiet and a little unguarded, "Do you ever think we missed our window, Beckett? Like there was some version of us that could have happened, and we just let it walk by." My heart had climbed straight up into my throat, and I'd opened my mouth to say something true for possibly the first time in my adult life. And then her phone had rung. Palmer, calling to say he'd landed the city job, the one that would eventually take him away from her entirely. And the window, whatever it had been, closed itself quietly and firmly, and neither of us ever mentioned it again. I told myself, for the next 4 years, that I'd imagined the whole thing. It's a special kind of exhausting, loving somebody quietly enough that even you start to doubt it happened. Ivy Marchetti had grown up 2 doors down from me. Her grandmother, Rosa, ran Marchetti's Blooms out of the same storefront for 41 years, and when Rosa died the winter before, she left the shop to Ivy in a will with exactly one condition attached to it. A condition so specific and so old-fashioned that Ivy read it out loud to me on my porch steps 3 times just to be sure she wasn't imagining it. She left me the shop, Ivy said, staring at the paper like it might rearrange itself into something less absurd, on the condition that I'm settled. Her word, settled, by my 30th birthday. Engaged, married, something with a ring on it. Otherwise it goes to my cousin Renata, who has never once in her life arranged a flower that wasn't from a grocery store bucket. That's insane, I said. That's 100 years out of date. She was 100 years out of date. She also raised me, buried my grandfather, and built that shop out of nothing after Nano died. So I'm not exactly in a position to call her crazy to her grave. Ivy folded the paper in half, then in half again, the way she did when she was thinking too hard to sit still. My birthday's in 6 weeks. So find somebody. I don't have 6 weeks to fall in love, Beckett. I barely have 6 weeks to restock peonies for the Hargrove wedding. She looked up at me, and something in her face was doing this careful, hesitant math I recognized because I'd been doing versions of it myself for about 4 years. Unless. No, you haven't even heard the idea. I've known you since we were 9. I can hear ideas coming from a mile off, and this one's already crashed into the porch. She didn't laugh, which is how I knew she was serious. Fake it, she said, just until the trust clears. 6 weeks, my mother off my back, Renata out of the shop, and then we quietly, sensibly break it off and go back to normal. You already come over for dinner twice a week. Half the town already thinks there's something going on because you fixed my porch swing for free. I fixed your porch swing because it was a hazard. Sure. She said it in the exact tone that meant she didn't believe a word of it, and honestly, neither did I. Not really, not down where it counted. Please. I need this, and I trust you more than anyone else on earth not to make it weird. I should have said no. I want that on the record, for whatever it's worth. I stood on that porch with every rational instinct I owned lining up to tell me this was a catastrophically bad idea. That 4 years of quietly, patiently getting over a woman who'd never seen me as anything but the boy who fixed things for her was about to get undone in a single conversation. And then Ivy looked at me with her grandmother's ring. The real one, Rosa's own wedding band, clutched in one hand like a talisman, and something in me just folded. Okay, I said, but we need rules. Ivy's whole face lit up, relief chasing something else across it too fast for me to name. I already made a list. Of course she had. We sat at her kitchen table that night with a legal pad between us, and Ivy read her rules out loud like she was presenting a business plan, which, in a way, I suppose she was. Rule 1. Nothing physical beyond what a normal engaged couple would do in public, hand-holding, the occasional cheek kiss for appearances, nothing more. Rule 2. We keep our stories simple, dated quietly for 2 years, got engaged in private. No elaborate lies that could unravel under questioning. Rule 3. This ends the day after the trust clears. No drama, no hard feelings. We go back to being exactly what we were before. Rule 4. And she underlined this one twice, hard enough to tear the paper slightly. Nobody catches feelings. This is a favor between friends, and it stays that way. I read Rule 4 longer than I needed to. Something wrong? Ivy asked, watching me with that sharp, assessing look she got when she was pricing out a bulk flower order and didn't quite trust the vendor's math. Nope, I said, and folded the pad shut before my face could do something inconvenient. Rule 4's easy. It was, and I want this on the record too, the single largest lie I told in the entire 6 weeks, and I delivered it without so much as a flicker, looking directly at the woman I'd already been in love with for longer than I was willing to admit to myself, let alone to her. The ring itself came from a pawn shop 2 towns over, because Ivy refused, on principle, to spend real money on a fake engagement. And because neither of us wanted to risk anyone at Birch Lake Jewelers recognizing us, and starting the exact kind of talk we were trying to control. We drove out on a Tuesday afternoon. The two of us crammed into the front seat of my truck with the windows down and the radio playing something neither of us bothered to change. And I watched Ivy try on 4 different rings behind the pawn shop's fogged glass counter like she was choosing produce. "This one's too big," she said, holding up a plain gold band with a small, slightly cloudy stone. "It'll fall off if I so much as wave at somebody." "Then don't wave at anybody." "I'm a florist, Beckett. I wave at everybody. It's basically the job." She slid it onto her finger anyway, turning her hand under the light. And something about the sight of it there. A stranger's old ring, cheap and slightly too large, sitting crooked on her hand, did something unreasonable to my chest that I chose, very deliberately, not to examine. "What do you think?" "I think it's going to slide right off the second you pick up a watering can." "Then you'll just have to keep fixing it," she said, and smiled at me in a way that felt, even then, like it was aimed at something underneath the joke. "That's your whole skill set anyway. Fixing things that don't quite fit." I bought the ring before I let myself think too hard about that sentence. The rest of that week was rehearsal, in the same careful, deliberate way Ivy approached everything. Quizzing me on fake anniversary dates over coffee at the shop counter, walking me through which of her cousins would ask which invasive questions, coaching me on how to hold her hand in a way that read as natural instead of performed. I learned that her coffee order was a ridiculous, syrup-heavy concoction she was embarrassed about and ordered anyway, and that mine, black, no sugar, made her roll her eyes every single time like it personally offended her. I learned she hummed off-key while she arranged flowers and had absolutely no idea she was doing it. I learned, mostly by accident, that 4 years of quiet, patient friendship had already taught me most of what a real fiancé would supposedly need to know, which made the rehearsal feel less like studying and more like finally being allowed to say a truth I'd been sitting on. "Okay, pop quiz," she said on the 3rd night, sitting cross-legged on my workshop floor with a legal pad balanced on her knee while I sanded down a table leg nearby, mostly to keep my hands from doing something unwise. "Where did we go on our first date?" "We didn't have one. We've been friends since we were 9. Wrong answer, and also cheating. Pick something plausible." My Aunt Franny will absolutely ask, and she has a memory like a courtroom stenographer. I set down the sandpaper. "Fine. Loon's Landing, the little diner by the marina. Booth in the back. You ordered the patty melt. I ordered a burger, and you stole half my fries because you always do." Ivy blinked, pin frozen midair. "That actually happened. Junior year. You're not allowed to use real memories. That defeats the purpose of a cover story. You told me to make it plausible. Nothing's more plausible than the truth." She stared at me a beat too long before writing it down anyway, and something in her face, brief and unguarded, made me wonder if she was thinking the exact same thing I was, that we'd been building the foundation for this fake relationship for 22 years without either of us noticing we were doing it. "Next question," she said, a little too quickly. "What's my favorite flower?" And it better not be a generic answer, because if you say rose, I will personally revoke your engagement. "Ranunculus. The layered kind, the ones that look like they've got 100 tiny petticoats. You keep a bucket of them behind the counter that technically aren't for sale. They're for sale. They're just very, very expensive to the right customer." She smiled down at the legal pad, a small, pleased, private smile that she probably didn't know I could see. "You actually pay attention. I've had 22 years of practice." We fell into a rhythm after that first rehearsal night, one that had nothing to do with the actual 6-week deadline hanging over us, and everything to do with 2 people who'd apparently been circling the same orbit for over a decade finally letting themselves get a little closer to the center of it. I started showing up at the shop before opening most mornings, coffee in hand, watching her unlock the crooked green door in the gray early light while the town was still mostly asleep. She started leaving my favorite kind of biscuit wrapped in wax paper on my truck's dashboard on days she knew I had early jobs. No note, no explanation, just quietly there, like it had always been there, like she'd been doing it for years, and I simply hadn't noticed until the rules gave both of us permission to. The first real test came at Sunday dinner, the week after we bought the ring, with Carol Marchetti presiding over a table of aunts, uncles, and one deeply skeptical grandmother's lore-adjacent cousin named Renata, who eyed the ring on Ivy's finger like she could smell the pawn shop on it. "Well," Carol said, setting down a casserole dish with the theatrical weight of a woman who'd been waiting for this announcement her entire adult life. Finally, I was starting to think Ivy was allergic to commitment. I wasn't allergic, Mom. I was busy running a business. "You were busy," Carol said, turning her attention to me with a look sharp enough to strip paint. "Not telling your own mother you were dating the Wren boy for 2 years. We didn't want to fuss," I said, which was at least technically half true, since we very much did not want the fuss currently unfolding in front of us. Renata, seated across the table with her arms crossed, leaned forward. "So when's the wedding?" "We haven't set a date," Ivy said smoothly, sliding her hand into mine on top of the tablecloth. Warm and steady, and entirely too convincing for something we'd rehearsed twice over coffee. "We're taking our time." "Convenient," Renata said, given the timing. "Renata," Carol warned. "I'm just saying, 6 weeks before her birthday, suddenly there's a ring." Renata's eyes flicked to me, assessing, unfriendly. "No offense, Beckett, but you've fixed that woman's porch for 4 years and never once mentioned a relationship." "We kept it quiet," I said, "because Ivy's had enough of this town and her business already. You'd know something about that." That landed harder than I meant it to, but Renata sat back, and Carol, for the first time all dinner, looked at me like maybe I wasn't just the boy who fixed things after all. Under the table, Ivy's hand tightened around mine, just once, quick and grateful, and I told myself that was rule 1. Nothing more. It kept happening like that, over the following weeks, small moments that were supposed to be performance, technically, structurally performance, that stopped feeling like performance almost immediately. Ivy started leaving her porch light on for me, even on nights I hadn't said I was coming by. I started showing up with coffee before she even opened the shop, standing in the cool gray morning while she unlocked the door, both of us pretending this was just efficient logistics and not the best part of either of our days. We developed rituals we never discussed out loud, closing up the shop together most evenings, me sweeping loose petals off the floor while she counted the register, the two of us walking the 3 blocks back toward our houses side by side, her hand finding mine somewhere around the second block without either of us ever deciding to make that a rule. "You don't have to walk me every night," she said once, a few weeks in, standing under the crooked awning while she locked the shop door. "I've been locking up alone for years." "I know you can," I said. "I like the company. Rule 1's going to have some real logistical problems if you keep looking at me like that," she said, but she was smiling when she said it, and she laced her fingers through mine without waiting for me to offer. "Rule 1's fine," I lied, smooth as anything, and felt the lie settle into my chest like a stone I was going to have to deal with eventually. The ring became its own quiet ritual too. It was, as predicted, slightly too big, and Ivy had a habit of twisting it around her finger when she was thinking, or nervous, or trying not to say something. I started noticing when she did it, during Sunday dinners, during the increasingly frequent run-ins with Renata around town, during the one deeply uncomfortable afternoon Palmer Voss walked back into her life like he'd never left it in the first place. Palmer was Ivy's ex-fiancé, the real kind, from 4 years earlier, before I'd let myself hope for anything more than friendship. He'd left town for a bigger opportunity in the city and left Ivy with a canceled wedding and a stack of unused invitations she still, to my knowledge, kept in a box in her closet. He showed up at the shop on a Thursday afternoon in early June, dressed like a man who'd never once doubted he was welcome anywhere, and made a beeline straight for the counter where Ivy was arranging a delivery of white ranunculus. "Ivy Marchetti," he said, like her name was a private joke only he understood. "Heard you inherited the place. Heard you're engaged too. Didn't believe it until now." Ivy's spine went straight as a fence post. "It's true." Palmer's gaze slid over to me, slow and assessing, The particular once-over men give each other when they're deciding how seriously to take a threat. Beckett Wren. Still fixing things around town? Still fixing things, I said. Funny, Palmer said, turning back to Ivy before I could add anything else. How things work out. I always figured if you settled down with anybody, it'd eventually circle back to me. We had something real, once. Something hot and sharp went through my chest, fast enough to startle me with how little of it had to do with performance. I stepped half a pace closer to Ivy, not exactly shielding her, just closing the space until there was no room left for Palmer's comment to sit comfortably between us. She's engaged to me, I said, keeping my voice level, and whatever you two had, it isn't relevant to whatever this is. Palmer's easy grin flickered, thinned, then recovered. Sure, he said. Congratulations, then. Truly. He glanced once more at the ring on Ivy's hand, and something calculating passed behind his eyes that I didn't like at all. Nice ring. Simple. Didn't peg you for simple, Ivy. You always wanted the big stone. People change, Ivy said tightly. After he left, the bell over the door still swinging, Ivy stood very still behind the counter, both hands braced against the wood, breathing like she was working hard to keep it even. I came around and stood beside her, not touching, waiting. I hate that he still gets to me, she said quietly. I hate that 4 years later, 30 seconds in a room with him, and I feel 19 again, waiting to find out if I'm enough. You're not 19, I said, and you were always enough. He just never had the sense to notice. She looked up at me then, something unguarded crossing her face, and for one long, dangerous second, I thought she might close the distance between us herself. Then a customer came through the door asking about wedding centerpieces, and the moment folded itself back into ordinary afternoon, and I told myself I'd imagine the way the air in that shop had gone thin and bright, the way it does right before something changes. That night, walking her home, I noticed she was twisting the ring around her finger again, faster than usual, and when I reached over and gently stilled her hand with mine, she went quiet. He's not wrong. You know, she said eventually. About the ring. I did always say I wanted something big and obvious. Something everyone could see coming from across a room. And now? She looked down at our joined hands, at the small, slightly cloudy stone catching the last of the evening light. Now I think I like something quieter. Something that snuck up on me instead. I didn't say anything. I couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to, because my whole chest had gone tight with the particular ache of hoping for something you're not allowed to hope for yet. The appraisal scare happened 2 weeks later, and it very nearly ended everything early. Carol, apparently unsatisfied with simply believing her daughter was engaged, had gotten it into her head that a proper engagement announcement in the Birch Lake paper required a proper ring photo, and had, without asking either of us, brought the ring to a jeweler friend of hers for a quick appraisal, just for insurance purposes. Darling, don't make it strange. She delivered this information at Sunday dinner with the casual cruelty of a woman who had no idea what she'd just done, and I watched every ounce of color drain out of Ivy's face across the table. You did what? Ivy's voice came out strangled. Mr. Alderman said he could have it back to you by Wednesday, Carol said, oblivious. He was very complimentary of the setting, though he did seem a little confused about the Mom. Ivy's hand found mine under the table, gripping hard enough to hurt. You can't just take my ring without asking. I was trying to help. I need it back. Today. Please. We drove to Mr. Alderman's shop that same evening, both of us tense and silent the entire way, and I spent the whole drive rehearsing increasingly implausible explanations for why a florist's engagement ring might reasonably appraise for considerably less than a real diamond typically would. Mr. Alderman, mercifully, turned out to be a kind, unhurried older man who handed the ring back to Ivy without a hint of judgment in his expression. Lovely piece, he said. Sentimental value, I'm guessing, more than market value. Some of the best rings are. He smiled at both of us in a way that suggested he knew exactly what kind of piece it was and had decided, generously, that it wasn't his business to say so. You take care of each other. Walking out of the shop, Mr. Alderman's bell chiming softly behind us. Ivy let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since Sunday dinner. I nearly had a heart attack in there, she admitted. The whole drive over I was rehearsing excuses. Family heirloom, sentimental value. We're not concerned with resale. Every single one of them sounded worse than the last. You didn't need any of them. He didn't ask a single hard question. He didn't need to. I think he clocked it the second he picked it up. She hugged her arms around herself despite the mild evening air, the particular gesture she made when she was cold on the inside rather than the outside. It's strange. A month ago, I would have been embarrassed if somebody figured out the ring was fake. Tonight, I was terrified, and I don't fully understand why the two feelings are so different. I think I do, I said, quieter than I meant to, and didn't finish the thought, because finishing it felt like handing her something neither of us had agreed I was allowed to hand her yet. In the truck afterward, Ivy sat holding the ring in her open palm instead of putting it back on, staring at it like it had grown heavier in the past hour. That was too close, she said. If he'd said something in front of my mother. He didn't. But he could have. This whole thing is one careless comment away from falling apart. Beckett. And I don't. She stopped herself, jaw tight, and looked out the window instead of at me. I don't know why that scares me as much as it does. I had a guess. I didn't say it out loud, because Rule 4 was still technically, officially, in effect, and because some cowardly, self-preserving part of me was terrified of being wrong about what I thought I'd seen crossing her face at the shop, at Sunday dinner, on the walk home under the streetlights 3 nights a week. So instead I reached over, took the ring gently from her open palm, and slid it back onto her finger myself, my thumb brushing over her knuckle a beat longer than the moment strictly required. There, I said quietly. Fixed. She looked down at our hands, then up at me, and something in her eyes had gone soft and uncertain in a way I'd never seen from her before, not in 22 years of friendship. You're good at that, she said, fixing things that don't quite fit. I've had practice. Neither of us moved for a long moment, the truck idling in Mr. Alderman's gravel lot, the whole evening balanced on some invisible edge neither of us was brave enough to step over yet. Then her phone buzzed with a delivery reminder, and the spell broke, and we drove home in a silence that felt less like avoidance and more like two people carefully, deliberately not saying the same thing at the same time. Palmer surfaced one more time before everything came to a head. This time at the engagement party Carol had already begun quietly planning without asking either of us. A full sit-down affair complete with string lights strung along the porch posts, and a cake that read congratulations Ivy Beckett and careful pink icing. He showed up uninvited, already seated at the edge of the yard by the time I arrived, carrying a tray of appetizers Ivy had handed me so I'd look useful, dressed in a blazer that told me exactly how seriously he was taking his own uninvited attendance. Didn't expect the whole production, he said, nodding toward the lights. Cake and everything. Carol always did love a spectacle. You weren't invited, Palmer. Small town. Word travels. He picked up a lemonade nobody had offered him and took a slow sip, watching me over the rim of the glass. I'll be straight with you, since we're apparently doing straight talk today. I made a mistake leaving the way I did. I know the timing's bad. He glanced past me, toward the porch where Ivy stood laughing at something her Aunt Franny had said, her whole face gold in the evening light. But I don't buy that this is what she actually wants. I knew her before you ever fixed a single porch swing. You knew her 4 years ago, I said. You don't get to walk back in and assume the woman on that porch is the same one you left behind. And you think you know her better? I know I never left. Palmer's jaw tightened, the easy charm slipping to show something rawer underneath. She deserves somebody who can give her the life she actually wanted. The city, a bigger shop, She has a shop her grandmother built with her own hands, in the town her whole life is rooted in. And if you'd asked her a single real question in the last 4 years, you'd know that's exactly the life she wants. You just weren't in it. I set down the tray. I think you should go. He looked at me a long moment, something calculating and a little wounded behind his eyes, then set down the lemonade and left without another word, cutting across the side yard instead of walking back through the party. I didn't mention it to Ivy until much later, sitting on her porch steps after the guests had gone home and the lights had been switched off. For years ago, I would have chased him down that street, she admitted, turning the ring slowly around her finger. Tonight, I didn't even notice he'd come and gone. I think that tells you everything about how much has actually changed and how little of it has anything to do with him. The fight, when it finally came, arrived exactly the way these things usually do. Not over something enormous, but over something small enough that it could only have been standing in for something much larger. It was 3.5 weeks in, 10 days before Ivy's birthday, and Carol had scheduled an engagement party without consulting either of us. A full sit-down dinner with the entire extended family, complete with a cake that said "Congratulations, Ivy Beckett" in careful pink icing. Ivy found out about it the same way I did, from a group text, and showed up at my boathouse that evening with her arms crossed and something brittle in her voice. "We need to end this early," she said, without preamble. "This has gone too far." "A party, Beckett." My mother ordered a cake. "So we tell her to cancel it." "You don't understand my mother. Once there's a cake involved, there's no canceling anything." She paced the length of my workshop, stepping around a half-finished dresser without really seeing it. This was supposed to be simple. 6 weeks, quiet, low-key. Now there's a party and a cake and Renata watching us like a hawk and Palmer showing up wherever I turn and I can't. She stopped, pressing both hands to her face. "I can't keep doing this and pretending it doesn't mean anything. My heart did something complicated and painful. Does it mean something? That's not the point." "It's exactly the point, Ivy. The point," she said, voice rising, "is that in 10 days this ends, and I have spent every single day since we started this arrangement forgetting that fact a little more, and I don't know how to keep doing that, and then just stop. Go back to normal. Watch you fix somebody's porch and wave at me like nothing happened." The words hit the room like a dropped hammer, and for a second, neither of us moved. I could have said something careful, something that protected both of us from whatever came next. Instead, for years of quiet, patient want finally ran out of patience. "Then don't stop," I said. "Don't go back. Ivy, I have been in love with you since before this ring existed. I bought a fake engagement ring for a woman I've wanted to marry for real since we were 26 years old, and I have spent 6 weeks pretending that was purely professional courtesy. And I am so tired of pretending I don't know exactly what I feel." Ivy went very still. "You can't just say that." "Why not?" "Because if it's not true, I don't think I survive finding that out. And if it is true," her voice broke slightly, "if it is true, then I have been building an entire fake wedding around a real feeling and calling it a favor, and I don't know what to do with that. Beckett, I genuinely don't." "Then let's find out together," I said, and close the distance between us before either of us could talk ourselves out of it. I didn't kiss her, not yet. Not in the workshop with sawdust on the floor and a half-finished dresser between us like an accidental chaperone. I just took her hand, the one with the ring, still slightly too big, still catching the light in that particular way that had ruined me weeks ago in a pawn shop parking lot, and held it there between us like proof of something neither of us had let ourselves say out loud. "I don't want to fake this anymore," I said. "Any of it. I want it to be real. I want to marry you because I love you, not because your grandmother put a deadline on it." Ivy's eyes filled, and for a second I thought I'd overplayed my hand entirely, said too much too fast in a moment that had already been standing at the edge of too much. Then she laughed, wet and startled and unbearably relieved, and closed the last few inches between us herself. "You absolute idiot," she said, against my mouth, right before she kissed me. "You could have said something 4 weeks ago and saved us both a lot of trouble." I was following the rules. "The rules were terrible," she said. "I wrote every single one of them hoping you'd break at least one. We didn't cancel the engagement party. That, it turns out, was the easy part. Once you stop pretending, everything else falls into place with almost embarrassing speed. What took longer, what took the better part of the next 10 days, was untangling the actual mess we'd built underneath the pretend one. The trust clause, the deadline, The fact that Ivy still technically needed to be provably engaged by her 30th birthday to keep the shop her grandmother had built with her own two hands. Which brings us back to that stuffy little law office, 6 weeks after the whole arrangement started, with Mr. Pruitt's pin uncapped and me reaching for Ivy's hand to take the ring off, and Ivy pulling it back like I'd threatened her. "Ivy," I said again, gentler this time, understanding now exactly what I hadn't understood in the doorway. "I'm not taking it off because it's over between us. I'm taking it off because it was never the right ring to begin with." Her eyes came up to mine, wary, uncertain, still bracing for something she couldn't quite name. "The trust's cleared, Mr. Pruitt said, sliding the paperwork across the desk, oblivious to the actual drama unfolding in front of him. "Miss Marchetti retains full ownership of the property, effective immediately. You're free to go." Carol, by the window, had both hands pressed to her mouth. I got down on one knee right there on Mr. Pruitt's slightly threadbare office carpet and pulled the real ring out of my jacket pocket, the one I'd bought 2 days earlier at Birch Lake Jewelers. No fog on the glass this time. No rush. Just me picking out the exact opposite of big and obvious. Something small and quiet that I hoped, desperately, would sneak up on her the way she'd told me she wanted. "Ivy Marchetti," I said, "I bought you a fake ring 6 weeks ago because you needed somebody to pretend with. And somewhere in the middle of pretending, I fell in love with you for real. Which, if I'm honest, I already had, years before any of this started. I don't want you to keep wearing a ring that was only ever meant to buy us time. I want you wearing one that means I'm not going anywhere. Will you marry me? For real this time. No trust clause. No deadline. Just because I love you. And I have for longer than I let either of us know." Ivy was crying before I finished the sentence, laughing through it the way she did everything. Both hands pressed over her mouth exactly like her mother's. "Yes," she said, before I'd even fully gotten the box open. "Yes, obviously. Yes, you enormous idiot. Get up here." I slid the real ring onto her finger, and this one fit perfectly. No twisting, no catching, no need for fixing, and Ivy looked down at it, and then up at me with an expression I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve. Carol was openly sobbing by the window now, and even Mr. Pruitt, who I would have bet real money had seen every conceivable version of a courthouse-adjacent proposal in his career, cleared his throat and busied himself unnecessarily with a stack of papers that didn't need straightening. Ivy pulled me up off the carpet by both hands and kissed me again, laughing against my mouth in a way that felt like every rehearsed kiss over the past 6 weeks finally, gladly, becoming obsolete. "For the record," she said, pulling back just far enough to look at me properly, "Renata owes me $20. She bet me this wouldn't happen until at least Christmas." "You bet on your own engagement?" "I bet on you," Ivy said. "I've been betting on you since we were 9 years old, and you got a poison ivy rash trying to impress me. I just finally decided to admit I'd already won." "You know," she said, "Renata's never going to let either of us live this down." "We didn't lie about the important part," I said. "We just needed a fake reason to admit the real one." Mr. Pruitt, to his credit, simply capped his pen, slid the finalized paperwork toward Carol, and said, with the weary patience of a man who had clearly seen every version of this scene before, "Congratulations." Genuinely, this time, I assume. Carol, still by the window, made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob and crossed the office to hug us both at once, nearly knocking Mr. Pruitt's nameplate off his desk in the process. "I knew it," she kept saying, into my shoulder, into Ivy's hair. I knew there was something real under all that nonsense about 2 years of quiet dating. I just knew it, which was, strictly speaking, not remotely true, but I decided that particular afternoon was not the moment to relitigate the timeline. We didn't leave the office right away. Ivy sat on the edge of Mr. Pruitt's desk, turning her hand under the fluorescent light to watch the new ring catch it, and I stood between her knees with both her hands in mine. And for a few minutes neither of us said anything at all, just let the last 6 weeks settle over both of us like something finally set down after being carried too long. "I need to tell you something," Ivy said eventually, quiet enough that it was really only for me. The night we bought the fake ring at the pawn shop. I already knew a little, not all of it, but enough. I picked the one that was too big on purpose, because some part of me wanted a reason for you to keep touching my hand. I fixed it 3 separate times. I know. I counted. She smiled, soft and a little embarrassed, like admitting it cost her something. I told myself it was practical. It was never practical, Beckett. I just wanted an excuse. You could have just told me. So could you, she said, for years ago, on the dock, before my phone rang and ruined everything. We're both idiots, I said. Slow, stubborn, 22 years of friendship idiots. The slowest, she agreed, and kissed me again, right there in Mr. Pruitt's office, while Carol pretended very unconvincingly not to watch, and Mr. Pruitt filed the paperwork with the specific, practiced discretion of a small-town lawyer who had learned, over the years, exactly when to look busy. When we finally walked out into the parking lot, the late afternoon sun turning the whole street gold, Ivy stopped on the sidewalk and looked back at the office building like she was trying to memorize it. 6 weeks ago, I walked in there terrified of losing my grandmother's shop, she said. I never once imagined I'd walk out having gained an entire life I didn't know I wanted yet. I didn't have anything clever to say to that, so I just pulled her in and held on, right there on Main Street, in front of anyone who cared to look. No rules left to worry about breaking. We got married that October, in the flower shop itself, string lights woven through the crooked green awning, white ranunculus everywhere because Ivy insisted, half joking, that Palmer's one useful contribution to her life was reminding her what she didn't want. Renata came, grudgingly, and cried through the entire ceremony despite months of skepticism, which nobody let her live down either. Carol sat in the front row sobbing into a handkerchief she'd clearly brought for exactly this purpose. My old dog, Otto, wore a small bow tie and behaved for exactly 4 minutes before knocking over a bucket of peonies, which Ivy declared, laughing, the most on-brand thing that had ever happened at her shop. Mr. Pruitt came too, at Ivy's insistence, sitting near the back in his usual reading glasses, and told us afterward, with the closest thing to sentiment I ever saw cross his face, that in 20 years of drafting trust documents, he'd never once seen a client circumvent one of his grandmother's more eccentric clauses quite so thoroughly, or quite so happily. When it came time for vows, Ivy went first, holding a card she'd barely glanced at because she'd clearly known every word by heart for weeks. I wrote a list of rules the day I asked you to fake this with me, she said, and Rule 4 said nobody catches feelings, and I want it on record that you broke that rule spectacularly, and I have never in my life been so glad to lose an argument I wrote myself. When it was my turn, I told her I'd spent 4 years teaching myself not to want things I wasn't sure I could have, and that she'd undone that particular lesson so thoroughly, so patiently, and so accidentally, that I couldn't remember most days why I'd thought it was worth learning in the first place. You asked me to fix a fake ring so it wouldn't fall off your finger, I said. I've been trying to fix things so they fit you properly ever since. I don't plan on stopping. That night, dancing barefoot on the shop floor with my wife, surrounded by the same white ranunculus that had started an entirely different chapter of this story back in June, I thought about how every single rule on that legal pad had failed, spectacularly, gloriously, in exactly the order that mattered most. We settled into a life that looked, from the outside, almost exactly like the one we'd been faking, which still makes both of us laugh when we talk about it. I still show up at the shop before opening with 2 coffees, one ridiculous and syrup-heavy, one black with no sugar. Ivy still leaves biscuits wrapped in wax paper on my dashboard on mornings I have early jobs, except now she leaves a note too, usually something short and teasing, occasionally something that makes me sit in the truck a minute longer than I mean to before I can start the engine. Renata, true to her word, never let either of us forget the 6 weeks of suspicious timing, and made it the centerpiece of her maid of honor toast, which got the biggest laugh of the reception and also, unexpectedly, made her cry harder than anyone else in the room. Ivy kept the shop exactly as her grandmother had left it, crooked awning and all, though she did finally repaint the sign that spring and asked me to help letter it, which meant 2 full weekends of both of us arguing cheerfully over font choices in a way that felt, honestly, like the truest version of us there'd ever been. We still keep the original fake ring in a small box in her nightstand drawer, not hidden, not sentimental exactly, just there, a reminder of the particular 6 weeks that taught us both how much we'd been quietly, foolishly waiting for each other without ever saying so out loud. Some nights, closing up the shop together, sweeping loose petals off the same floor we got married on, Ivy will catch me looking at her and ask what I'm thinking, and most of the time I tell her the truth, which is that I'm still a little amazed a fake engagement ring, bought in a rush at a pawn shop 2 towns over, ended up being the thing that finally taught 2 stubborn, patient people how to stop pretending they weren't in love. Otto still tries to knock over the same peony bucket every chance he gets, as if he's decided that's his permanent contribution to this family story, and neither of us has ever had the heart to stop him. So I'll ask you the same question I keep asking myself, sanding down some new piece of furniture in the boathouse on a quiet evening, glancing at the ring on my own hand like it might still surprise me. What would you have done if you found out the person pretending to love you had actually meant it the whole time? Have you ever had something fake turn into the realest thing you've ever felt? Tell me your story in the comments below. And for those of you who'd like to be a little closer to us, we've opened memberships where you'll get shorter exclusive stories every single week with no ads. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next story.